The year is 154 BC. Liu Bi, the ruler of Wu, was unwilling to let the emperor strip any of his lands from him, so he killed the imperial envoy and raised an allied army together with the states of Chu, Jiao, and others. He conscripted all able-bodied males over 14 years old and led an army of 200,000 to fight the troops of the central government. Coincidentally, 42 years earlier, just after Liu Bang had granted the state of Wu to Liu Bi, he foresaw future problems and regretted his decisions. When news of the rebellion reached the capital, it shook the court. However, Cao Tuo thought this was a golden opportunity. He went to the Prime Minister in hopes of getting rid of his hated rival minister, Wen and Jing.
这个袁盎收受了吴王很多金钱，专为吴王隐瞒欺骗，总是宣称吴王不会造反。而今吴王真的反了，请治袁盎通敌之罪。
The Prime Minister refused Cao Tuo's request because he didn't have any proof. And it wasn't long before Wen and Jing heard about it. In February 154 BC, the rebel army defeated the forces of the central government, capturing one town after another. It didn't look good for the emperor. Because Yuan Ang had once been the prime minister of Wu, the Emperor Jing asked him for advice. Yuan Ang said he had a plan.
有什么计策？
请您将左右退下。我所说的话，除了天子，别人都不能听。
So the emperor ordered Cao Tuo to leave.
吴楚两王的造反口号是诛杀小人晁错，他们只想得到原有的封地。如今只有杀掉晁错，派使臣赦免吴楚七王的罪行，恢复中央削去的封地，这样可以兵不血刃地退兵。
The emperor thought long and hard.
如果的确如你所说，我不能因为一个人而祸及天下。
我也没有什么良策，请陛下再仔细斟酌。
Eventually, the emperor had Cao Tuo killed when he was on his way to court. He had no idea his life would end like this. On the battlefront, General Zhou Yafu led the government army to face the main force of the rebels. The general built a strong line of defense and wore the enemy down. Then, the general dispatched a contingent to cut off the enemy's supply lines. This, more or less, determined the outcome of the war. Liu Bi was killed during his army's retreat, and Liu Wu committed suicide. The tomb of Liu Wu has been discovered on Lion Hill, Xuzhou in Jiangsu province, and it has been restored. The tomb provides historians with clues concerning the power struggle that took place more than 2,000 years ago. The terracotta soldiers and horses seem to have been placed here without proper order. This group of soldiers is oriented strangely. This group is a mixture of archers and foot soldiers, hardly in battle formation. Historians now believe there's a reason for this. When Liu Wu killed himself, his loyal subordinates had to bury him quickly before orders forbidding a formal burial were received from the central government. Liu Wu's last wish was to have a fitting burial. In 144 BC, the emperor took advantage of his victories in war to issue an imperial decree revoking much of the powers of state rulers, especially their power to appoint and remove officials. The state rulers were now dependent on salaries from the court, and this meant they could no longer play a role in government, making them nobles in name only. It took the Han Dynasty 50 years to consolidate central power, and after much difficulty, the imperial army was finally victorious. China was finally united under an emperor after a series of fits and starts. However, the people's hopes that all of China would be governed by a unified government and ruled by a single voice increased steadily. There are many factors affecting the rise and fall of dynasties. However, an invariable rule is that there must be stability before there can be development. After the Han government completed the centralization of power, the conditions were ripe for economic development on a large scale. This was when the empire began to flourish. In 194 BC, the Empress Dowager Lü Zhi called an emergency meeting of her ministers in the capital. An envoy handed her a letter from Mo Du, the chief of the nomadic Xiongnu Empire. The letter stated, "I have heard that the great Han Emperor Liu Bang has just passed away and that you are a widow living alone. This can't be very pleasant for you. It so happens that I am also single. Why don't you marry me now?" The flippant state letter terrified the officials, and Lü Zhi asked her ministers for advice. General Fan Kuai responded forcefully.
我愿带着10万精兵横扫匈奴的国境。
樊哙这个人应该杀掉。
Ji Bu, another general, had an entirely different opinion.
当年高帝刘邦率领40万大军出击匈奴，反而被匈奴兵围困于平城。今天樊哙怎么可能以10万人马横扫匈奴呢？这是当面说大话。
Lü Zhi, who was the de facto ruler, showed her excellent diplomatic skills. She sent a reply to Mordu in which she wrote, "I have already grown old and have lost most of my hair and all of my teeth. So I will select a few beautiful virgins and send them to serve you instead." This little drama occurred in 194 BC, just 8 years after the founding of the Han Dynasty. The letter from Mordu was very confrontational, and the Han court had no alternative but to swallow this insult silently. But in point of fact, it was in a very difficult situation. Historians estimate the population of China at the time dropped to just 20 to 30% of what it had been at the end of the Warring States period, and that only about 15 million people survived the chaos of those times. There were vast tracts of land where no traces of human life could be found.
刘邦到这个曲沃去，说曲沃这个人口啊不剩1/3，就是大部分人都死了，哎，那么这个其他各地的情况也差不多，经济凋敝到什么程度呢？说皇帝啊找不着这个4匹一个颜色的马来驾车，那么那些将军还有相，有的是只能坐牛车，就是可见就是说。经济凋敝很厉害，所以说人相食，就是说人吃人。
Victory or defeat in war depends greatly on the economic strength of the warring sides. It was obvious the Han government wanted to defeat the Xiongnu, but the country was too weak to face such a powerful enemy. "75 years after Empress Lü wrote her letter to Mordu, General Huo Qubing was ordered to take on the Xiongnu. The Han army killed over 70,000 Xiongnu soldiers and won a complete victory. Afterwards, General Huo conducted a series of rituals on the Kenti Mountains, where he climbed a high mountain and worshipped Lake Baikal before leading his troops back to China. At this time, the Han army was beginning to grow stronger, controlling vast regions to the north. It also established 4 provinces in the eastern parts of the empire, while bringing southern states into the fold. The extent of the empire's lands and its power were greater than ever before. In just 75 years, the Han Empire went from being a poor and weak country suffering the ravages of war to being one of the most powerful countries on earth. This enormous transformation fascinates historians. But just what was the mechanism and motive force of its rise? In December 1983, workers from a brick kiln were mining clay from a hill outside Jinzhou. In the process, they discovered an ancient tomb. The discovery brought to light one of the most important documents from the Han Dynasty, known as Laws of the Second Year. This 2,000-year-old document, recorded on bamboo slips, revealed what really happened. The laws showed, in no uncertain terms, that the government under Empress Lü used legal procedures to grant lands to all the country's subjects.
2000户律的规定呢，它就是说，主要是根据等爵的不同，然后可以占有不同数量的田宅。它规定呢，就是公族15庶人这样一个群体，它可以占有1顷田，1宅。所谓的1宅，应该就是那个9小亩。1顷田是100亩，然后根据你的爵位、族籍的增加，
农民从国家那儿得到了土地，那么他还有要尽相应的义务，比如要交纳田租，要服徭役，要服兵役，这都是和这个土地相关的。
Historical records give a vivid portrait of Empress Lü. This woman was said to be very thorough in thought and decisive in action, but she was also cold-hearted and cruel. In 196 BC, while the emperor was on a military expedition, she conspired with the prime minister to have one of the generals killed right in the imperial palace. After the emperor died, she assumed absolute power, and her orders were followed without question, just as if they had come from the emperor. However, she responded to the provocations of the Xiongnu with forbearance, because at the beginning of the Han Dynasty, China was too weak to go to war with the Xiongnu. The laws of the second year appeared at an important juncture in Chinese history. The system of land grants in the household laws was a continuation of a system that had been developed in the various states during the Warring States period. Back then, the princes of the various states were their actual rulers, even though in name the states belonged to the emperor. Historical records show that in the Warring States period, the rulers of these states gave land to the masses.
授田制，是战国时期形成的，并且被普遍的实行。其中呢，关东国家，特别是中原地区这些国家，实行的更早一些。秦国呢稍微晚一些。关东国家实行授田制，有一个过程啊，主要是这个各国纷纷废除井田制以后，开始实行授田制。有人主张这是土地国有制。既然是由国家授田嘛，这个土地应该是由国家控制的。中国古人没有后代的这种所有权的概念。如果我们用这个概念来套古代的话呢，授田制可能更接近这个土地国有制。但是土地一旦授给了农民，往往不再收回。所以久而久之呢，事实上会发展成一种这个出现土地的私有化。
In other words, the laws of the second year was a continuation of the system of land grants established in the Warring States period, in which land was distributed by the central government. This kind of distribution already had an implicit political significance that the land belonged to the person who ploughed it. Compared to the brief period of the Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty's rule was long and stable, so the transfer of land to the masses under this system was steadily carried out. After Empress Lü died, the government progressively lowered land tax to about 3%. In addition, tax was reduced from 120 coppers per head to 40. Although this was still a heavy burden on the peasants, it was the lowest tax rate imposed on people in ancient times. As a result of this policy, the people's enthusiasm for production increased by leaps and bounds, and stimulated by the policy of land ownership and low taxes, the country's wealth increased many times over. Decades later, the country was rich enough to support a war against the Xiongnu. There is perhaps nothing wrong with this kind of explanation, but constant progress in archaeology has given us additional perspectives to understanding the past. In April 2002, an archaeological team from Hunan began excavation of a site along the banks of the Youshui River. Soon, a discovery was made in an ancient well that astonished the archaeological world. A total of 36,000 bamboo slips were found, and there were over 30,000 characters on them. Historians believe that its importance for research on the Qin dynasty is second only to Qin Shi Huang's terracotta warriors. The archaeological find confirmed much that was known about the Qin dynasty and expanded it greatly.
秦商鞅变法的时候，他对土地制度确实进行了一个重大的改革。他的改革，一方面就是他是把爵位和土地制度结合起来，形成这样一个以爵位民田宅的制度，就是说你爵位越高，你可占有的或者说国家授给你的土地和房屋越多。这是秦商鞅变法的一个重要的一个变化。
Later, the state of Qin strictly employed a system under which the amount of land granted to a warrior and the title he was given was based on his exploits in battle.
所以秦国的军功制，它的军功爵制，它的核心就是鼓励这些战士当然来源于老百姓，去战场上去杀敌杀敌。你杀敌越多，那么功劳越大，那么你得到的待遇越多。所以它是配套的。你的住100平米，还是住200平米，还是做别墅，就根据你的功劳。
The state of Qin followed a harsh policy focused on farming and war. Everyone was both a peasant and a soldier. The only way a person could rise in rank was through military exploits. Although no law clearly stipulated that land was privately owned, after the state instituted the system of land grants, the practice of selling land slowly developed. So, whenever the Qin army faced the army of one of the other 6 states, the Qin soldiers attacked their enemy like tigers. They cut off the heads of the enemies they killed and strung them around their waists to serve as evidence of exploits upon which their rewards would be based. This was the main way they had to improve their lives. History records that Qin soldiers sometimes fought each other over an enemy's head. The other 6 states had similar policies of rewarding soldiers, but there is no evidence that explicitly states that they had a policy that directly linked farming and war. Historical records do contain reports of land sales in the other 6 states, but not enough to be of major significance. The records of the Grand Historian reports that a military officer in the state of Zhao frequently made an inspection tour of his estates. Another book also has references to private property. The sale of houses and farmland was already quite common. In the Warring States period, all the states strove to adapt to the privatization of land, and people could improve their lives through labor or business. But the state of Qin did more. It linked land ownership with military exploits, and because of this, the Qin's military prowess was much greater than that of the other states. It took only 10 years for Qin to unite the country. In 221 BC, Qin Shi Huang initiated the Age of Monarchy. He was a man of great talent and bold vision, and he thought he had created a unique empire that would last forever. He built the Great Wall in the north and the Lingqiu Canal in the south. He also built a highway system connecting the various parts of the country. He forced the Qin way of thinking and lifestyle on the other 6 states. He relied on military force and forced his own vision onto the world as he saw it. But he could not have imagined that just 3 years after he died, Liu Bang would lead his victorious peasant army to occupy the Qin capital Xianyang and rename it Chang'an. How was it possible for the previously invincible Qin army to suffer total defeat?
Qin的灭亡的原因，很多学者都共同认为啊，它有一个就是繁刑重练这样子一个行政表现，刑法非常严酷，向民众的征收的这个物资数量非常惊人，特别是徭役的负担啊，使得这些农民们离开了他的土地，整个社会的这个生产秩序被打乱了。这个农耕我们知道，这个农忙的时候，劳动力离开田地呢是非常可怕的事情。他征用的这个劳力啊，数量是可以说数以百万计的。
In the year 125 BC, a young scholar by the name of Sima Qian began his travels to collect materials for his book. He started from the capital and he traveled throughout the country. He noticed that wherever he went, he could see people working busily. As a historian, he quickly drew the conclusion that when the country is bustling with activity, everyone prospers. Sima Qian wrote, "Everyone is born with the impulse to better their lives. People are willing to sacrifice everything, even to gamble their lives, to satisfy their desires." However, after Qin Shi Huang unified China, he did not make a great effort to improve people's lives. Time and again, his tyranny ran counter to people's longing to improve their lives. So the foundation of his empire collapsed. The collapse of the Qin dynasty must have made a deep impression on the Han rulers. In 186 BC, the government carried out total economic reform and gave land to individuals. it did not impose any regulations prohibiting the sale of land, thereby tacitly recognizing private ownership of land. The Laws of the Second Year was a continuation of the reform of the land system begun in the Warring States period, and it completely dismantled the outdated 9 squares system. These laws brought about the rapid development of private land ownership. The policy of giving peasants land and reducing their corvée and tax burden stirred the hearts of the masses. It was soon to prove that the Chinese nation, which highly values hard work and thrift, has an enormous capacity to create wealth. In the 40 years after the adoption of the land distribution policy, the country's population doubled and the people steadily became more prosperous. The government had such massive grain reserves that it had to start storing grain out in the open air. The people raised so many horses that herds of them roamed free in unpopulated areas. People competed so much to show off their wealth that no one was willing to show his face in public riding a mare. Historians consider this period as one of the 3 golden ages of Chinese history. However, this romantic picture was not backed up by evidence until a fortuitous discovery in 1971, which changed our understanding of those times. In 1971, a 2,000-year-old tomb was discovered at Ma Wangdui in Hunan province. The occupant of the tomb was Lady Dai, the wife of the Prime Minister of the Principality of Changsha during the reign of Emperor Wen of the Han Dynasty. From the tomb, we can get a glimpse of the country's prosperity at that time. This silk painting from the tomb depicts several hundred people on horseback or riding in carriages on a grand outing. This silk cap weighs only 25 grams and seems to be as light as smoke. It shows the heights the textile arts had reached. One of the most interesting objects is the set of gymnastics graphics, which reflects the positive mental attitude of the people of those times. The site was not in the most prosperous part of the empire, but the funerary objects are still quite dazzling. If we could go back in time and visit a flourishing Chinese city, or even better, get a glimpse of the capital, what would it be like? When Emperor Wu took the throne in 129 BC while still in his youth, he looked at the great wealth of his country and decided to launch a war against his powerful neighbor, the Xiongnu. By 119 BC, in the course of 11 years of bitter fighting, the Han army killed more than 220,000 enemy soldiers and took a vast stretch of land. This was the pinnacle of the Han Dynasty's power. Today, as we look back on the Han Empire, we can rely on the great discoveries of archaeological research and use advanced economic theory to explain the rise of the dynasty. Apparently, this brilliant period was ushered in by a primitive free economy. The beginning of greatness of the Han Empire can be traced back to a movement of land reform. In 119 BC, the emperor ordered two of his generals, Wei Jing and Huo Qubing, to make a long expedition to the northern desert to attack the Xiongnu. General Wei Jing led his troops far beyond the Han Empire's borders and engaged the main force of the Xiongnu. He attacked the Xiongnu with 5,000 cavalry, and the Xiongnu met him with 10,000 cavalry. The two armies fought bitterly, with neither side getting the upper hand. But then a fierce windstorm arose, turning the sky dark. Wei Jing grasped the opportunity and ordered his two wings to outflank the enemy. The Xiongnu suffered total defeat, and the Han army killed more than 19,000 Xiongnu troops. Meanwhile, General Huo Qubing led his troops to attack another Xiongnu army, and the two armies immediately locked in a fierce battle. When it was over, the Han army had killed over 70,000 enemy troops. The Han army won victory after victory. The balance between the two empires was changing, and the Han Empire gradually moved from a position of relative weakness to one of strength. The emperor did not know that his enormous empire was undergoing a period of warm weather. Even though his country was able to grow 2 crops a year, he could not maintain that level of military expenditure for long. After the military campaign of 119 BC, the government simply did not have the economic power to fight more wars.
从战国到西汉，应当是确实是一个温暖期。当时是，年平均气温比现在大概要高2度左右。植物它生长的这个生长区的北界向北推进呢是有重要意义，据说差1度就要差好几百公里呢。就是这个气候的条件，对于这个王朝的兴盛，是有好处的。特别是在北部边疆，看一下这个整个中国古代的历史啊，就是温暖期的时候，往往都是中原人、中原文化向北推进的这样的时代。
To raise money to pay military expenses, the court ordered the rich to make contributions to the state. However, despite repeated calls from the government, very few people made voluntary contributions. Just at this time, a rich man known as Bu Shi came forward and said he was willing to give half his wealth to the government. This surprising turn of events captured everyone's attention. The emperor ordered an emissary to investigate.
你打算当官吗？
我从小就是个牧羊人，不习惯官宦仕途，不愿意当官。
家里有冤情吗？是否想用捐款达到伸冤的目的呢？
我从小就与世无争，乡里人如果贫穷，我就借钱给他们；如果作恶，我就耐心教导他们。大家都尊重我，我哪有什么冤情呢？
如果是这样，你这样做为什么呢？
当今天子讨伐匈奴，我认为深明大义的人都应该出力，有钱的人应当捐钱。大家都这么做的话，匈奴就会灭亡了。
When the emissary returned to the capital, he reported his conversation to the emperor, who thereupon asked his prime minister for his opinion.
不是的做法不计人情，超出常规的人与事儿不能作为奖赏的依据。希望陛下不要奖赏他。
The Prime Minister believed that since no one except Bu Shi was willing to donate money, Bu Shi had to have some ulterior motive. Eventually, the emperor did not pursue the matter further, but the fact that there was only one person in the whole empire who was willing to donate money for the war disturbed him deeply. In time, a phenomenon occurred that had never before happened in Chinese history. The gap between the rich and the poor gradually widened. A small number of people had become so wealthy that they were richer than many of the nobles. Bu Shi was one of them. Bu Shi was very skillful at raising livestock. In less than 20 years, he had increased his herd of sheep from a couple of dozen to more than 1,000. Meanwhile, another man from Sichuan province owned and operated an iron ore mine. He employed more than 1,000 servants and lived in luxury. Shi Shi, a native of Shanxi, started out as a peddler, but he wasn't afraid of hard work and gradually accumulated great wealth. It's said he was so wealthy, he wouldn't have been able to spend it all in several lifetimes. To peasants who had always tilled a small plot of land, new occupations like sheep herding, mining and retail business presented new paths by which a person could become rich through hard work. In the middle of the Han Dynasty, small private businesses underwent explosive growth. Rapid economic growth had a deep effect on social life, but histories from the times do not discuss this issue. However, the great development in archaeology in the past century has brought to light many unimaginable discoveries. In 121 BC, after a bitter war with the Xiongnu, the Han army had gained effective control of the Juyan Lake region, which became the northernmost outposts along the boundless Gobi Desert. Here, archaeologists have found numerous bamboo slips which tell the following story. A fishmonger arranged with the outpost commander to sell fish. They sold more than 5,000 fish in a single transaction. This is a surprisingly large number. Other Han Dynasty bamboo slips from the region record large volume sales of lumber and liquor. This shows that trade was flourishing even in the most remote parts of the empire. When the young emperor ascended the throne, the Han Dynasty was just entering a period of rapid development in the handicraft industries. To understand the historical reasons for this, we have to look back another 100 years to the end of the Qin dynasty. After Qin Shi Huang unified the whole country, he instituted a policy of supporting agriculture and suppressing small businesses. He set up state monopolies for essential goods and services under government control, and he kept private businesses from growing too large. At the beginning of the Han Dynasty, in order to encourage economic development, the government opened all the country's rivers and lakes to commercial traffic and allowed the people to engage in all kinds of economic activities. Driven by business profits, private commerce underwent enormous development. The government had always had an uneasy relationship with businessmen. Businessmen were believed to have made no economic contribution, and just relied on fast talk and their wiles to make money by hoarding and profiteering. They were nothing more than leeches on society. Government officials and the aristocracy also abhorred the lifestyle of the businessmen, who were richer than many nobles. They had no social position or political power, yet lived better than those who did. People with actual position and power were very resentful of this. Let's take another look at Bu Shi's attempt to donate money. This seemingly trivial incident was in fact enmeshed in a complex social situation. Due to the way wealth was distributed in the country, a sharp conflict arose between those who represented the state's interests and the newly rich merchant class. In order to strip rich merchants of their wealth, the emperor adopted a policy of suppressing private businesses. In 119 BC, the emperor issued an edict nationalizing all the mining, smelting, and casting, as well as salt production. From then on, they were all state monopolies from which private capital was excluded.